Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon, testimonies from reverts and converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. This week's guest, I'm going to try to not botch her name. It's Izabela Ciesinska. Good?
Yeah.
Good. All right. All right. So Izabela is a children's author and illustrator. Her website is izzypix.com, I-Z-Z-I Pix, P-I-C-S.com. We're going to get into this later in the story, but she released a book with Ascension Press earlier this year. It's called The Little Donkey and God's Big Plan. It's right over here, over my shoulder. Looking forward to talking about that. Izabela, welcome to the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Eddie.
So, Izabela, let's start with where you came from. Did you have a religious background in your childhood?
My grandmother was very religious. I was born in Poland. It's a very Catholic country, or it was at the time that I
Yeah.
was born there. It's changing now a little bit, sadly. But back then it was very religious, and it was during the time where Pope John Paul II was the Pope, so the Poles were very, very proud of that. But my parents, they didn't practice the faith. And so that's one of the reasons why probably I never really got into it, even though I did attend a Catholic school. Here, when we got to Canada, um, both the elementary school and high school, it just never clicked for me. And I think it never clicked for me because I didn't understand it. If you don't have someone to really guide you and to present all this in a way that a child's brain can conceive and relate to their own life, you can't value something that you don't understand. And so that was my path. I was maybe a cultural Catholic, but I did not practice it spiritually.
Do you think that just more participation from parents, from catechists, what do you think does it for children to actually latch on to the faith?
That is an excellent question because now, decades later, I can reflect on what was missing for me. Nobody made a mistake. Everybody did things right. My mother was a Christian.
Yeah.
She maybe wasn't a practicing Catholic, but she was very faithful in terms of Christianity. And she was the one that probably was my lifeline to Christianity, especially in the dark times when I was an atheist, even. But reflecting now, I think it was the mythology was missing because uh, the going back to my Sunday school and my Catholic school, they did everything right in terms of teaching me the right things, but children, kind of like adults, myth is the thing that I think helps you understand it more. And adults have a lot of content, but I didn't find at the time that the content was relatable or attractive for me as a child. So they taught me the prayers, they taught me the principles, the sacraments, but it was a very kind of mechanical process, if you will, the typical education. And children, what we need is stories, stories for children. And after I left school, I would be bombarded, as we all are, by content from the secular world. So inevitably that wins out. And so now reflecting back on it, I'm realizing how important it is for Christians, especially Catholics. There's not a lot of us creating uh, a good amount of children's content, high value children's content, and not just in books. I would love to see animation studios pop
Yeah.
up.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, games, apps, if that's the technology we have, then just create more content for kids that will not only compete with the big brands that we see today, but that will outdo them because we can. We have the content, we have the depth.
That's such a great point. So when you say high value, that's what you're saying, being able to compete to where people would not say, "Oh, it's Christian, so it's got to be horrible or it's missing certain aspects. It's not as seamless as far as the animation or the storyline is not compelling because they're trying to get too creative." Or I've seen a lot of things trying to compete and missing the mark dramatically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That growing up, I saw that as well, and there were, a lot of good people trying to create content, but it, like you said, it missed the mark. I don't know if it was a budget issue or what was happening, but also, we go, unfortunately, a lot of us make the mistake of going where the money and the opportunity is, and I made that mistake as well. And a lot of, I think, Christians end up being in an industry, say the entertainment industry, where they might get the opportunity to be excellent artists, but the content is obviously not Christian. So now I've learned my lesson that we really need to encourage Christians to not compromise, that we don't, instead of relying on other industries, we have to focus on creating that the heart, I think, of maybe an entertainment industry that is going to produce Christian content, because otherwise we're going to lose ourselves, we're going to lose future artists, as we have in the last century. I think in the last century we kind of either lost a lot of artists, or we forgot that we also can create great content. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what happened, whether Christians just went into other industries, or whether there wasn't enough investment. But I think I'm seeing a turnaround,
It's good.
a renaissance.
That's good. So let's go back to realizing you're a cultural Catholic. Obviously, in that moment, you didn't realize that. So what was that like for teenage years and finding yourself, phase one?
Finding myself as a teenager, my goodness, I don't think I did. Um, I had, as a teenager, I didn't appreciate the values that, let's say, my school was trying to teach me. I went to a Catholic school, so we had uniforms, and of course, we always tried to alter our uniforms to look better, what we thought. But now I realize that that was such a good thing for the school to instill in us. I think more schools should instill that in us. This aesthetic, and an aesthetic that is, um, I don't want to say professional, but semi-formal, I would say. It does build good habits. Like, I had the privilege of attending school in Austria, and we got marked not just on finishing our homework correctly, but it had to be beautiful. Our handwriting, the aesthetics of our handwriting was judged. By the time I was, in grade two, we were writing with a fountain pen. And our nails were checked, our posture was checked. The teacher would look at the collar behind, inside the collar, to see if we're taking care of ourselves. All those are really good habits that my Catholic school also tried to instill, that as a teenager I really hated. I rebelled. And I think what was missing then was that connection between, cause and effect. If you cultivate these habits, we're not doing this to control you, we're doing this to instill these virtues in you that are going to benefit you greatly, and not just your life, but the world in general. Because to create something beautiful, a building or anything, you need to have a sense of aesthetics. You need to understand certain laws, how they come together. And it starts with the way we present ourselves, not just what we present, but the way we take care of ourselves. And so, yeah, I just didn't understand it then, and I felt it was too controlling. But I firmly stand with it now. But I would just add the why. Explain to the kids why you want them to do things the way you ask them to do it.
So you said you rebelled. What did that look like practically?
Oh, um, well, a lot of sneaking out. I was an athlete at the time, so it was a very strict life. Uh, my father really maintained that, but I still managed to sneak out a few times, and unfortunately, dabble in these kind of, uh, I would say, activities that the secular, more like the liberal world, tells you it's all good. The more you experience, the better. Have a drink of this, have a smoke of that. Go date around without responsibilities. The more people, the better. As if that ever turned out well for anybody. So things like that, these activities that actually don't produce good results at all. Uh, and so basically, the typical liberal lifestyle is what I guess I engaged in, not to the extent that maybe people do today, and that's considered even normal by
Sure.
that, I guess, group of people. But I engaged in it enough to, in retrospect, realize, wow, it led to nowhere. It's such bad life advice to give to young people that, go experience whatever you want. The more experience, the better. Not at all. I would say the more temperament, the better. The more you can uh, cultivate impulse control and reason, and to be able to draw the line between cause and effect, and how that's going to affect your life 10, 15 years down the line. That is something useful for teenagers and college students to learn.
As it relates to the uniforms and the structure that you had, did you feel that you had to essentially return to school and be a certain way, look a certain way, even though you were kind of out of the box, so to speak, outside of school?
Can you rephrase that question? Like then or now?
Yes. So in that time, during that time, you were doing the things that were rebellious. Did you feel like, okay, now you're back at school, you have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way, even though inside you're still very torn?
It was worse than that. I didn't even pretend. My biggest nightmares are my behavior in high school. The apologies I probably owe. Um, no, I didn't feel. There's always like this group of kids that just don't care. I wasn't really one of them, but we didn't. What I'm trying to say is that I guess the teachers weren't that strict with us, where we had to put on the face that maybe we should have. So I wasn't a troublemaker or anything, but I didn't feel the pressure to conform to those very good rules. I still, adjusted my uniforms and all that, and would still sometimes skip class, and would still, even though I was a tennis player, would still sneak out and attend parties and things like that. So no, I don't think I felt the pressure to pretend I was good or structured.
Got it. So did this carry into college life? What was like, I guess, a pivotal moment where you just said, you know what? Were you going to church at all during those
Nothing,
years?
no.
Okay.
Just in school when they and again, I couldn't tune in. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't appreciate anything about the faith. Only now as an adult, when I go to church, it's soul food. It's just soul food. I can't put it any other way. And uh, I realized what I was missing out. Um, but I guess as a teenager, that's going to be the next challenge for artists, is to create age appropriate content throughout a child's development that will help them see the principles of our faith in a way that they can appreciate and relate to their own life. And of course, I wasn't able to do that for whatever reason. It didn't click in my brain, and if it doesn't sink into your heart and your mind, you simply won't appreciate it.
Yeah, that's really good. So did you eventually not think of God whatsoever? Where was God in any of that? Did you find yourself praying when you were in difficult situations, or did you just turn off the God switch completely?
Eventually, I turned it off. By that time, I was what I call a lukewarm Christian. I kind of knew God existed. I couldn't understand Jesus. Jesus was a very abstract concept for me. How can someone die for my sins? That sort of thing. I couldn't understand it. The spiritual um, truth, actually. Um, but I knew there was a God. Just again, he also felt far, far away and couldn't. By the time I was in college, I knew he existed, but I didn't understand that the laws of God are the way that we also come to understand God. You can't just live life without making God a part of your everyday life and expect to get closer to Him and expect to become a better person. It's just not going to happen. You need to have some sort of devotion, which I didn't have at that time. Um, so I was very preoccupied with knowledge and career, the ego. When we're young, we want to achieve things, and that's what I was focused on. So God existed, but in the background, my mother was very, like I said, faithful. She was a faithful Christian, and we had a lot of conversations. And I think her prayers and those conversations kept me. Um, Even though God was in the background, at least He was still there in my mind. Um, and when I graduated from university, um, I would say a few years after graduation, I discovered the new atheist movement, and I felt like I was the smartest person. That's it. That's all I needed. These people know what they're talking about, and I definitely felt like I was the smartest person in my family. All of a sudden, I had things to say that would shut down all conversations about things that you cannot prove and you cannot touch. So that the beginning of that was interesting because when you find something new, it stimulates your mind and it gives you the illusion of moving forward towards something. But actually, by the end of that trip, it was there was nothing. There's just nothing at the end of atheism, and by the time I hit determinism, where atheism teaches that everything is predetermined at the Big Bang, including our conversation and me moving my hands. All that was predetermined. And there's no free will, no personal responsibility. That's when it was just desperation, this thing that I was relying on, atheism, to give me a lot of answers. All of a sudden, I felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. It just didn't sit right. How can there be no free will? How can we not be responsible for our actions? Um, and yeah, God certainly didn't exist then in my life, but I suppose the emptiness created a desire for something to exist, even though I didn't believe it existed. There was this kind of desperate desire for something to exist because this couldn't be it.
Wow, that's well said. So at the end of that road, you found emptiness,
Yeah.
and that's what led you to, I guess, start asking questions. Do you remember sitting down at that? Because obviously this is in hindsight, but do you remember in that moment saying, "What am I doing? Where am I supposed to go from this moment without losing your mind?" Because I know some people do at that point.
I think, yeah, I remember because that was also around the time that my father died. And when someone dies and you believe in God, it there's a lot of hope and in some ways a lot of relief because you know where your loved one is. Uh, Losing someone as an atheist, oh my gosh, that was it, I finally understood how some people get to the point where they hate this God that they don't even believe in. Because all of a sudden you start justifying it. Well, how can this benevolent creator of the universe allow these things to happen, like death and destruction and all that? I was very angry. I was angry, desperate, depressed. And I had my mother trying to, keep me afloat, and a very good friend of mine who is not a practicing Catholic, um, but she, in her own way, believes in God and Jesus, and in her own special way, she tried to also keep me afloat and to remind me of God's love. Um, I'd like to say that at that time that worked, It didn't, but I think it primed me. It primed me for finally getting out of that. I call it a black hole because when you get to that point in atheism and you have a desire for something deeper and you can't find it, it is a black hole.
For those that do not know, how would you contrast new atheism to old atheism or classic atheism?
I'm not familiar with classic atheism, but new atheism, what's attractive about it, especially at the time that I found it, were that the speakers of it were they're very smart. They especially at the time it was very new. Um, coming across Christopher Hitchens, very witty um, responses. He was very on his toes when there was a debate, and he had a great humor. And you have to be very intelligent to speak like that. It's very attractive to a young mind that's already uh, prone to arrogance. It's unavoidable. Young people are prone to arrogance, myself included at the time. Um, and someone that kind of carries that arrogance, it can be confused with confidence, and that was very attractive to me because it felt like they had the answers.
Yeah, I used to watch a lot of those debates, maybe between 2000 and 2010, and you're absolutely right. I thought that there was a high degree of confidence. And when you say on his toes, I felt like if you weren't ready to research anything and you're just looking at these clips, his responses were pretty good and made the Christian look really dumb and therefore in a fantasy land. And if you don't research the points that both parties were making, you're going to end up as you did in a certain spot. Okay. So as you're coming out, I guess, out of that black hole, obviously the grace of God was at work. How long of a period was that while as you were kind of, I don't know if you were crawling through that or if you were sprinting through it at some point, but how was that period?
No, it was a crawl. It was a 5-year crawl. Um, and it was definitely the grace of God and prayers because many years later, people told me that they continued to pray for me. People that I wasn't even very good friends with, they kept me in their prayers. And now I realize, wow, those prayers probably led to the next point, which was I that was 2014. That was the year where I emerged out of atheism because I was invited to join a film crew. At the time, I was working in film, and we drove from Toronto to California to shoot a film, and it was a like a 3-day drive, I think. And the first half of it was completely uneventful. But by the time we got to Arizona, like literally the second we entered Arizona, the landscape just changed. The energy just changed. 5 minutes later, I was a full-blown believer. Not Catholic, barely Christian, but convinced beyond any doubt that there is a God. Because not only was there a majesty in the landscape, it's indescribable unless you're there. Like the movies don't do it justice. The movies only capture the aesthetics of Arizona, but they don't capture what you feel when you're in there. There's something so special about the desert. I get why Jesus went to the desert and why so many seekers go into the desert. There's I don't know what's out there, but it's there, and it's I felt this kind of this, I suppose this divine power, but it's so powerful that we understand that as violence because only violence would have been able to produce this kind of, I guess, the rocks just tearing through the earth like that. And yet there was beauty because it didn't feel random. It almost felt like someone painted it. So it was this juxtaposition between this like brute power and brute force and this serene aesthetics. And it was so overwhelming that I was just convinced this is not random, this is not accidental. There's definitely a force behind this that has a mind. That's how I felt it. And the entire way I just kept saying, it was a 5-hour drive across Arizona. And all I could say is there is a God. There's a God.
That's going to stay with me. That was really well said. And I was able, even if partially, to get into your shoes right there. And there's a lot to be said about that. So barely Christian, though, he said at that point, barely Christian, in the sense that it's not as if in that moment you're now devout, you're practicing, you understand the gospel necessarily, right? Am I right? Because you had to
Correct.
relearn all these things that you were taught, but they kind of went in one ear out the other.
Yes, it's I've been, I suppose I've been away from Christianity for so long, and I realized I never understood it. So it was easy to let go. It was easy to allow it to become abstract. Again, Jesus Christ was I couldn't even say the name. I couldn't even say the name of Jesus Christ. It felt like I was speaking, I don't know, like, forgive me, like a superhero kind of. It was a caricature of someone. That's what it felt like to me. That's how distant I was from the Christian theology. But at least I was at a point where I realized there must be a creator. Um, and I wish I could say that it brought me, that I was already close to, embracing Christianity, but that's not the case. Because Christianity was so far, I searched for God in all the wrong places. I thought they were correct. I genuinely feel that people that seek in those places, be it New Age, occultism, and all that, a lot of them are real, true seekers. But the danger of that is that all those philosophies end up inviting you. They make you, that their introduction to it is that is a greater force, and you should learn about it. And it ends with, you are the God. And once I got to that part, at first I was excited because I felt like, oh yeah, I can create my own reality, I can manifest, write meditations, write rituals, we can manifest. And I realized, oh, how terrible. I can barely get my life together, and I'm supposed to now want all this power to create these big things in my life and in other people's lives. And it just didn't sit right with me, because human beings are fallible, and when you add ego to it, you get exactly what we get in the world today. You get big corporations destroying the world, you get individuals forcing their will on others. And if it got amplified, and if it continues this way, we will inevitably destroy each other, because human beings, when they manifest and when we believe that our will is the right will, then there's inevitably a clash. There will come a point where my will now clash with yours. And if I want something that you don't want, well, one of us has to win now, right? So realizing that, I realized is a one-way path to hell. This is, I didn't want that. I didn't want to use my will in a way compounded with my ego that will create a human being, me, who now thinks that my will is more important than everybody else's will. And so that was the introduction. That was the beginning of me jettisoning or escaping,
Yeah.
um, escaping that philosophy, because I realized it will lead to horror if more people embrace that kind of philosophy.
What would you say? So you're doing your own will. What was the foundation? What were the motives behind it? What was the force behind your will? Where did that come from?
I would say the classical ego that a lot of artists are prone to, um, creating for the purpose of success and acknowledgement and um, I suppose achieving certain status in the world and having a certain say, um, having the ability to buy certain things, literally the most superficial things you can think of.
Hmm.
And still that drives so much of the artistic world. Whereas when we look in back in history, some of those beautiful things that were ever created, they were not driven by those things. They were driven by these artists um, wanting to bring glory to God, be it through a beautiful cathedral, a beautiful painting. They were servants of something greater to themselves. And modern art, just the modern world, or art in the modern world, so few artists understand that. Um, and I suppose that's why so many of us end up being egomaniacs when we actually do achieve some sort of success in our field. And it creates so much cultural damage that I think anyone with a pair of eyes can actually see right now. And so I I realized that if we actually, if this kind of power exists and people can attain it, it's just not the right way, because so many of us, even if we had good intentions, will prioritize our own needs over everybody else's. But God's will em embodies everybody. He's going to find a solution that is not just right for me, but for everybody involved. Um, and when I came to that realization, that's when I started to become much more interested in Christianity, because I found nobody teaches it better than Christianity. Because as much as, Christianity asks us to submit to God's will, it also doesn't use force to force you to be a Christian. It's there's I suppose I don't want to name out any any other philosophies, but um it takes more of an educational approach with a lot more compassion, which I appreciated. The more I learned about Christianity, the more I realized that it did so many things right that we unjustly um, said that it was wrong.
Where did you start when you said, okay, I need to understand this faith? Did you do an internet search? Did you pick up a Bible? Did you recall an old chat with your mom back in the day?
Yeah, we always continue to talk. So we had a lot of talks, but I started seeking out more podcasts. So Bishop Fulton Sheen, Father Martins, Father Ripperberger. Came across some videos by Ascension Press without realizing that they're going to be my publisher in the future. But because I was drawing many hours a day, um, I had the privilege of listening to a lot of podcasts. But before I came into Catholicism, it was actually, I listened to a lot of megachurch stuff. I
Hmm.
didn't know the difference, you see. I didn't know the difference. I thought Christianity is the same, as long as you believe in Jesus and God. But I realized that a lot of that megachurch stuff is very similar to the New Age that I just left. It kind of turned God into a Santa Claus that eventually also just didn't sit right with me. But what it did do for me is that it introduced me to the Bible. Um, not introduced, I already knew the Bible, but it I never read the Bible, so I got to hear all these stories from these preachers and these mega church videos online, and I was more fascinated in that, in the parables, in the mythology, in the lessons, in the history, um, and the meaning of these stories. And so that's when I started reading the Bible on my own, and I started seeking more Orthodox teachers, that videos that weren't telling me how to build the life I want, but rather like what happened at that time. What does this story mean in the Bible? Why did Jesus do this? What does the Holy Spirit mean? What is the sin against the Holy Spirit? Like that's always been such a mystery to me. What exactly is this sin? It doesn't really say, right? So I needed to find these priests that would actually interpret it properly. And I started to appreciate the people who have devoted their lives to studying the Bible and helping us interpret it within a historical context and a cultural context at that time, because we judge the Bible so harshly
Right.
sometimes, but that's because we don't know the context and we don't know the history. So I started to appreciate a lot more once I started taking a more orthodox path.
Very good. Very, very smart. Obviously led again by grace to even recognize, to ask those questions in the first place. So as you're finding various answers, based on what you said earlier about the 5-year crawl, I'm assuming you didn't just dive. Did you go to a parish at some point soon after watching some of those videos of the priests and whatnot?
Yeah, well, it took a while. Because I was still a lukewarm Christian. I was listening to a lot of content, but perhaps not practicing with devotion. I still didn't understand that this isn't something you do for entertainment. This is really like beyond a lifestyle. This needs to be your number one goal, to come to know God uh, as slowly or as fast as you're capable, but you have to do it not just every day, but it really does have to be at the forefront of your heart and your mind. Um, and so I wasn't there. I was just listening to these videos, and I made the mistake of thinking that hearing is practice. And so I wasn't engaged in any parish. Um, I wasn't even saying my daily prayers. I wasn't reading the Bible. I was maybe skimming through it. But I had enough where I was interested in the content, and that's when I wrote my children's story, and what actually inspired me to enter my first parish in 30 years was Ascension Press. When they responded to me, they had their first interview with me before they decided to give me a contract, and I tell you, it was the most embarrassing interview of my life, I think, because they probably expected someone with some level of commitment, and they found out very quickly that I had none. And I still don't know what compelled them, what inspired them to give me a contract, but I was so moved by them because the ladies that I spoke to at Ascension, they were so good, they were so kind, that I immediately recognized there's something different about these people. What is it? Why are they different than everybody else I know? It's just a vibe. I can't explain it. Just their tone of voice. And so I realized that it's probably whatever they're practicing, whatever they're bound by, that is clearly having an influence on them. So I have to check this out. And I also felt an obligation, to give them the best book that I possibly could. So I'm like, all right, I think I need to step into a church. And I did. I stepped into my local church, and fortunately, we have a church near my house that looks like it was built in the medieval times. And me being an artist, when I see something beautiful, it's the first thing I notice, especially like true beauty. I don't mean gimmicky beauty. And there's few things are more beautiful than a beautiful church. And so as soon as I stepped in, the high arches and all that, and the beautiful plaster and the wooden beams, I felt a peace that I can't really explain. Yeah, again, it goes back to great art. Great art is able to do that to a person. And then I heard my priest speak, um, Father Peter Turon, at the Holy Rosary Parish. He has a gift. I don't know if every priest does. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But when you find a priest who has the gift, it speaks to your soul instantly. So the first time that I entered a church probably a year and a half ago now. Um, I just I haven't looked back. I look forward to it. For the first time in my life, I look forward to getting up on Sunday morning.
Oh, a year and a half ago, that's when it all happened. Okay, so
Yeah.
what was the process of, I guess, re-entering, receiving the sacraments for the first time in decades, as you said?
Well, I will still have to go through my RCIA because you see, I wasn't as devoted as I thought. I should have spoken to my priest. So I will be joining the RCIA this year, probably in the fall. Um,
Wow.
but I was attending for the soul food, as I call it. And my priest, when he gives a sermon, there's always a lesson that I carry with me throughout the week, and I'm sure everybody that attends that parish experiences the same thing. So that's what I was going there for. But the last 7 months, I felt this calling to have a confession. And I tell you, I don't know what it was, what kind of block it was. I was I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it for a long time. It took me probably even more than 7 months to just build up the courage to go. And there were several times where I thought I had the courage and I chickened out. Um, but finally, before Easter, I broke myself, and I went in there. It was really one of the hardest things to just get up from the bench and to. I saw my priest walking to the what do you call the thing where he sits and the confessional? Is that a
Yeah, confessional. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I saw him walking. I'm like, oh no, I can't escape this now. And so I kind of got my courage together, and I knew it would be slightly emotional because the a few days earlier I was writing down 30 years of worth of sins. It was a long list, um, and I felt emotional about some of them, but nothing overwhelming. I thought I would just maybe my voice would crack or something. Um, and as soon as I started speaking, I fell apart. I fell apart. I was weeping. It felt like a waterfall was washing over me. I still don't understand what happened because all sins are serious, but I didn't kill anyone. I didn't commit a sin that would merit maybe falling apart like that, or so I thought. And yet I did, and I could barely get it together. Um, And I think even my priest was a little bit concerned, where he's like, all the angels rejoice when someone comes back. So, just keep that in mind. He tried to make me feel better, I think, but it was a very overwhelming emotional moment. Remorse, I didn't even think I was capable of. And with the tears, the weight it was a literal weight. And I still cannot believe it. But for the first time in my life, I understand why we have these sacraments. There is a physical component to them and a spiritual one. You cannot treat this like a physical action because if you do, I don't know if it's going to accomplish much. Your soul has to be engaged. Your heart has to be engaged. Again, it needs to click in your heart and mind because when it does, something transformative happens. It really does. And so I had this experience where I probably cried out all my sins, um, and a little bit more later in the bench. And for the first time in my life, I actually finished the what is it, the Chaplet of Mercy. You see, all this stuff is new for me. What do you call this?
Chaplet
Yeah,
of Divine Mercy.
yeah,
Yeah.
that. And I had to do it with my phone because I had no idea what I was doing. But for the first time in my life, I did it. I've never done this before. Um, And I kid you not, when I stepped out of the church, I felt like a songbird, as joyful and as light as a songbird. I was grinning from ear to ear, inexplainable, inexplainable. And so that was my experience with that sacrament, with the sacrament of confession.
Wow. And one of the other terms, we hear about Sacrament of Reconciliation, Sacrament of Penance. One of the other terms for it is Sacrament of Conversion. And what you just described is a very powerful moment of conversion, of surrendering. And like you said, it's hitting here. It's not, hey, here's an exercise where I just go and I sit down and I say a few things and I'm out. That was that's very, yeah, very powerful. Does that bring us to the present moment, or is there something else in that story? I know you mentioned RCIA that's coming up, but is there anything else about current or over the past year or so, parish life or anything related to that?
Well, I would recommend everyone in my position to please check with your priest, because right after I ended up committing sacrilege without knowing, and I received the Eucharist, but I've never been confirmed. And the way I found out was I went on a Reddit forum, on a Catholic Reddit forum, and there was this heading. This guy said, um, this thread where he said, I embarrassed myself during Eucharist. And I read it, and it's this poor guy who also woke up one day. He's been thinking about God for a long time, stepped into his local church, didn't realize it was a Catholic church, didn't realize what it's all about. And when everybody got up, he got up. And when everybody went to receive the Eucharist, the priest asked, said, the body of Christ. And this guy responded, yes. And the priest knew something's wrong. This is not the response you're supposed to give. And he asked him, did you receive your first communion? And the guy lied. And he said yes, but the priest knew he lied. And the guy just ran away. And then the thread ended with him saying, I didn't mean to offend anyone. But after doing research, I realized that you cannot receive the Eucharist without receiving all your sacraments. I'm like, oh, oh no, I didn't receive Sacrament of Confirmation. So then I read about it. I'm like, oh, so you have to go through this. Because you see, I was born Catholic.
Yeah.
So to me, there was no process. They just tell you what to do. And I would do it. And I didn't realize that when you miss this one sacrament, you can't receive the Eucharist. So now I read about it. I'm like, oh, okay. So there's a program I have to finish. So I'm in the process of preparing myself for that. I hope to be able to join it. I am going to join it this year. I don't hope, I'm going to join it this year.
That's
So I no longer receive the Eucharist. I have to sit it out. But that's where I am now, realizing that there is definitely power in the sacraments. They're designed that way for a reason, and it's better to move slowly. Don't rush through this. If you're not sure, take that time, take the months, the years if you have to. Do it properly, because when you will, if with the moment that it hits you in the heart, you're gonna understand it so much more fully. And so now that's where I am. I want to come to understand why things were designed the way they are, and I want to do it with respect and to never commit sacrilege again.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We have no idea how many people have potentially gone through that and need to hear, but again, you didn't know, but just expressing that is important. I actually know a few people that have been waiting to receive for a very long time, very, very long time. So when you're saying take your time, they're probably gonna potentially watch and say, yes, take your time, but pray for me, please. Um, okay. So you get the deal with Ascension Press. You've been an illustrator all these years. Did you feel like, I'm assuming upon release just earlier this year, that this love of yours for art and now finding the church, they kind of came together and you can actually help serve the church and address the needs of kids that are going through what you described at the beginning of your journey? They're receiving all these things and I don't get it. I don't want it, that kind of thing.
Oh, definitely. Uh, I now on a mission, if you will, of taking certain Bible stores, because we can't take them all, and telling them in a way where children can relate them to their own lives. That's what was missing for me. And, now in retrospect, I'm also able to realize how damaging some of the stories that I grew up with were. Because it's not just mindless entertainment. It's even if we want it to be, um, a lot of the fairy tales that we grow up with, they don't teach the right values or virtues even. And they do have this very um occult,
Yes.
maybe undertone to them that I didn't realize until now, just looking back. So I would like to tell stories that help children understand the simple values and virtues, because the more I learn about God and Christianity, the more I realize it's actually simple. These things are supposed to be simple. They're not supposed to be overly um, complicated. They're supposed to be so simple that we can actually relate this to our own lives, including children. And the Bible is it's totally doable to take these stories and to help translate them in a way that children will not only be able to understand, but immediately take this lesson and apply it to their own life.
That's good. It's funny, some of the complex theological uh, points, doctrines, dogmas, you'll often hear apologists draw analogies to break it down to say, hey, the church may have gone to great lengths to explain such and such in detail, to address things that you don't need to necessarily know about. But then they'll use an analogy and they'll just condense it so that a person that's overwhelmed can get it, receive it. And if they so choose down the road, they can go and explore the depths of that teaching. But for what you're talking about, you're absolutely right. So much of it, we tend to, I tend to overly communicate it or complicate it when it can be reduced in many respects. So that's good. Do you want to touch on the book and what maybe a summary of it and where people can get it and what were you trying to, what age group were you aiming for and what were you trying to achieve? That was like 5 questions in one. Enjoy.
Well, the book is called The Little Donkey and God's Big Plan. It's right here. And it's about a little donkey with big dreams. And he lives on a farm, and he sees all these very useful animals doing what they're meant to do. But he can't do any of those things because he's tied to a post. And he has a friend on the farm, a little girl who believes in him, and she firmly believes that God has a purpose for this little donkey. And so the little donkey believes her, and he says his prayers, he submits his purpose and his will to God, and he prays for God to reveal his purpose. And one day, two men come to the farm and they untie him, and the little donkey's purpose is revealed to him. And it's written for very young children. So I would say 5 to 8. But I was told, actually, I was told by Radio Maria. I had an interview with them a couple of weeks ago. The lady that was conducting the interview with me, she was a high school teacher, and she was like, you know what? I would totally take this to my high school students because the lesson I think is
Yeah.
universal. And I would say it's not just for children or high school students, it's for everybody. And that is, you are never too old or too young to start serving God. So when I go and I read to children, um, right after I ask them, so what are some of the ways that you can serve God? The little donkey did this and this for Jesus. What can you do for Jesus? And believe it or not, they put it together and like, well, we can help the teacher clean the classroom. We can help our parents do chores. We can take care of our pets, feed our pets, things like that. So you can take the same formula for high school students even, and maybe even nursing homes. I would love to actually visit some nursing homes and read it to them,
Yeah.
because as long as you have breath in you, life in you, you you have everything you need to continue to do things for God, and your purpose might change along the way. Your purpose is going to be different when you're 20 than when you're 95. But nevertheless, I'm pretty certain God has a purpose for all of us our entire life.
Excellent. It is a good book. I read it, so it's for my age group as well. And yeah, it was good. And I read it to the kid. Did I read it to the kids? They read it. So I think my oldest read it to the little ones, and they all liked it. So that was good. Is there anything else you want to mention to the audience?
Oh, yes. Well, the book can be found on ascensionpress.com/little donkey. And what else? I know that some of your audience have been waiting a long time to finish the process. Um, I guess I would still just say, if it's too long, it's too long, but make sure you understand it. It's not so much about time as it is about um, really it clicking for you. And the last thing I would like to say is if there is anyone that might find it as challenging as I did, God and Jesus being very abstract to us, may I just challenge you the way my mother challenged me when I was an atheist. And her challenge to me was surrender. Just fall on your knees and find out if God exists. Fall on your knees tonight and ask Him, tell Him that your mother told you to seek Him out, to show you that He exists. So that's my challenge to your audience, that if you're unsure or you're sure He doesn't exist, you have nothing to lose. Just get down on your knees and say, Izabela said that you exist, God, and I'd like to find out. And just say your first prayer. Say your first prayer. Lay it down, and many of you will be surprised with the outcome.
Yeah, it's funny. When I interviewed John Michael Talbot, we talked about Michael Card, who's another musician, Protestant musician. And one of his songs, he says, I think the lyric is, forget all your pondering and fall on your knees. And when I heard that probably 10 years ago, this is very powerful. And what you just said connects to that. Izabela, thank you so much. That was really, really impactful. And keep up the good work. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And everyone, please share this episode. Please, for your children, grandchildren, consider picking up the book. And until next time, take care and God bless. Bye.